All right, Matt, you have looked at this from a variety of angles, but I think you wanted to explore the AI angle with us today.
I did. And in fact, my thoughts about the artificial intelligence elements from these updates, it probably dovetails rather nicely with Susan, your broad point that these updates want companies to think more about outcomes. I do agree with that. And I was struck about what the compliance guidelines now say around artificial intelligence and also what a somewhat overlooked second speech by the head of the criminal division, Nicole Argentieri. Earlier this week, she gave a speech to basically a bunch of computer crime specialists where she talked more specifically about what the Justice Department would like companies to do when thinking about AI risks. And I tie this back to Susan's point about outcomes because honestly, I don't know that it's quite clear for companies yet. What are the special things, the inputs, or the exact compliance activities we need to implement to address our AI risks? Because we don't know. AI is still so new that we're not entirely sure what an AI risk is. We can venture us some good examples, but step back and think about it. A business would need to think through what are the AI risks that my company creates? How am I using AI? Are we developing AI and then selling it to third parties? Are we using AI systems developed by another company for our own operations? So that's one way to think about your intersection with AI systems. But also, what are other people's uses of AI? Read that as scammers, fraudsters, cyber attackers. How are they using AI to come after my business? So you have risks that are, I'll say, are inward generated, facing outward. How are we using AI and what are we doing to introduce AI risks out into the world? And what are external AI risks coming at us? And the guidance basically says you have to think about all of that. If you are building a new AI system that potentially could be used to be weaponized in some way, you're coming up with a really clever generative AI tool. Could ne'er do wells out there take the tool that you're selling or offering and use it to create false documentation so that they could then run scams against other businesses? You would have to think about that. And are you introducing some sort of new risk that therefore you, the company, should be putting some guardrails around it? What about if you are using an AI system to automate something, or you're using an AI system to run your own, you've developed your own AI system to decide who's going to get credit decisions at my business? And what product recommendations are we going to get? What prices are we going to set for customers? It's no secret that AI could wind up discriminating against those customers that you have. How are you making sure that the AI you're using won't do that? Whether you have developed that system yourself, whether you have bought it or rented it from some AI system provider out there, you're going to have to think about it all. And the guidance also says for the AI enhanced frauds that are out there, and there are going to be a ton of those frauds, you will need to stop and think, do we still have anti fraud controls that are up to the task? Maybe you won't. If you're a financial services firm, are you making sure that your customer due diligence controls, policies, procedures, are they able to detect AI driven false documentation, false passport images, that you could create a whole history of a person. So you're researching this customer who might look like they've not just been real right now, but they've been real for 20 years and they don't actually exist. AI could easily be used to create that sort of fictional personal history. So you need to think about all of that. Okay, so what are compliance officers, internal audit executives, anti-fraud people? What are they doing to think about what those risks are? There's a lot of risk assessment questions you need to start to think about. Who's going to be involved at what point? You could say that, let's say you're developing a new AI system that you might sell to somebody else. You're developing a pricing or customer recommendation, product recommendation tool. How are you making sure at the developer side of it, the software development of this tool, that you're building in good anti-fraud controls, that you're building in good behavioral controls? It's kind of a weird concept to think about from a technology perspective. Who would be involved in that? Imagine a compliance officer involved in software development processes. Typically, that would not happen. But if you're now using AI that essentially you're going to build it and design it and offer it to act like a person, compliance officers are involved in governing how people act all the time. How would compliance officers be involved in the software development of an artificial person, an artificial intelligence? And the last point that I want to raise is, like I said, this second speech from Miss Argentieri, who is the head of the criminal division. She spoke earlier this week at a cybersecurity and crime conference where they talked specifically about something like bug bounty programs. These are not new ideas in software development. You come up with a software product, and people might take it and test it and find bugs in it. And for a long time, software companies would say, "Don't do that. You can't find bugs in my program. I don't want people to know that they could hack into it." That had changed over time. So now eventually you hear about in the news that Microsoft Windows or Java or some other big program, Oracle, SAP, there'll be a new bug out there and they will publicize it and publish a patch for it so you can seal it up. Argentieri expressly said companies should be thinking about how to build a bug bounty program for AI. How would that work? Think about it, because yes, you need to come up with a patch program for actual errors in the code, but what about errors in how the AI behaves? That is not something a software coder would easily be able to figure out. Compliance officers would be able to see that's not a good thing the way it's behaving. That could be a compliance violation or a legal violation. How would they work with software development companies to or develop teams to think about bug bounties and or how to disclose a vulnerability that they found? And she basically said, yes, the big tech companies already do this, and they have pledged to do it. A vulnerability disclosure program for AI, that's something that Google, Facebook, Anthropic, OpenAI, they've all pledged to do that. She flat out said, other companies that are doing this that aren't yet signed on to that pledge, like the big tech companies, you should do this too. So I'm wondering, if you don't do that, if you're not diligent in checking up on what the vulnerabilities are in AI systems you develop or that you're offering, would that then reflect poorly on your culture of compliance and all of this guidance that we have from the compliance side of things, where the updated compliance program guidelines say that you should be thinking about new risks? And then she went on to give this speech to computer scientists about what some of those new risk management measures should be. There's an awful lot to think about here. And I would just encourage compliance officers to think about that. Think about who else on your team you should be talking with. And we could keep going and going, but this is going to be a fact of life for corporations for the rest of our lives.
Karen Moore, do you have a question or comment for Matt?
I do. AI is such a huge topic. Sometimes it's hard to get your head around the big
Yes.
picture and the small picture, what they're calling kind of general AI, this possibility that you can create an independent artificial intelligence, which is hopefully so far in the future that I won't be around to see it, or the narrow AI, the application of a specific artificial intelligence to a task. And it's because it's just easier to get your head around and a little bit less frightening to think about narrow AI. And I've really been thinking a lot about its use by compliance teams because you go into a vendor call now at a conference and there are more and more providers that will allow you to take data, start connecting the dots, doing a lot with it. But I know, and I'm sure all of you do too, from my own experience, that it's like the garbage in, garbage out kind of issue. So it's like, how are we using AI? What are the tasks that we're setting it to, and where are the risks associated with it? Which doesn't apply just to compliance teams' use, it applies to anybody's use of that. But to the extent that the ECCP kind of instructed compliance programs to use AI commensurate with the degree to which the enterprise is using AI, right? So if the enterprise is using it in a sophisticated way, the compliance program shouldn't be those cobbler's children go barefoot kind of situation. You should be using AI as well. But it's really what tasks are we setting it to and how are we putting that framework around those tasks that doesn't actually create more risk than it is designed to solve. With data privacy, I often used the shutting the barn door after the horse is bolted analogy because the information's out there. With AI, I've started thinking it more like the genie out of the bottle, right? The genie doesn't have its own will and ability to create an objective. All you can do is give it an objective that it will fulfill. Where in a lot of these kind of fables, you see the third wish is usually undoing the first two wishes because you haven't framed them correctly. And it seems to me that when we're using AI for compliance or other purposes, what objective or what task are we setting for that artificial intelligence, and how are we framing it so that you don't, I don't know, like think of Midas trying to say, I want everything I touch to turn to gold. And he ended up destroying his family and himself. So you have to put all these qualifications. Like, I'd like to become wealthy, not to the at the expense of my family or loved ones or community. I want to engage in world peace, but not at the risk of subjugating populations. I don't know. You have to put so many qualifications around. So I guess that really is my question: is how can we, as compliance officers, direct AI in the best possible way that doesn't actually create more problems than we've intended to solve?
I think it's a great point, and a couple of thoughts. First, yes, it's true that there are some very slick and impressive use cases I've seen specifically for AI in the compliance department. Pretty much every vendor I know at this point is scrambling to figure out ways to use AI to help the compliance office do their job well. Still, can't get away from the fact I don't think that's gonna be the big problem for compliance officers. I am not that worried about how they will use AI because A, they're thoughtful about what the risks are, and B, compliance is still fairly self-contained within the enterprise. I am much more worried about how will other parts of the enterprise use AI, and they're gonna intersect with customers, business partners, the greater world out there. That's how the genie gets out of the enterprise. I love your metaphor about the genie out of the bottle and granting wishes because that's all it can do. I think that is spot on for the sort of challenge we're facing. But, I still get stuck on how we are at least familiar, corporations, with how to handle some technology risks because technology up until now wasn't really reaching decisions and taking actions on its own. And now AI is. So it sort of serves the role of humans, but how you govern the risks of AI as opposed to the risks of the human are gonna be very different. And like I said, this vulnerability disclosure program that Nicole Argentieri from DOJ basically said, we're expecting companies to do this. How would that work? Yes, that every company making AI is going through the code to make sure there are no bugs in the code so it will behave and that it will work, that it won't crash. But how are you going to detect a vulnerability like the AI is going to pick up bad habits by interacting with people, and then it's going to start behaving in ways that it shouldn't and we didn't anticipate? You can see how a company might handle that with humans because we would be on you about training and testing, and HR people could probably come up with ways to govern discriminatory behavior and bad habits that employees might pick up. How are you supposed to do that with AI? Who's going to be HR is not going to inspect the code. Is HR going to grade their work? Does the AI get a performance review? That sounds foolish, but that's kind of what we're getting at when we talk about weaknesses in how AI behaves. And so we're going to need to think of whole new processes that will involve people not typically doing this stuff before. And that's going to be tricky. I don't think tech or intern, a lot of people would be imposed to helping out with that challenge. I just don't think it's ever occurred to anybody. That's going to be the challenge. And Yeah, we're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, as I understand it, Matt, one of the whole points about sophisticated AI and the difficulty of this explainability requirement is that there's a big black box around how the AI comes to its output. So the explainability and debugging, if you will, really are pretty impossible.
Yeah, I've said before that, look, humans have a black box too. We don't actually know how people think to reach a conclusion. But to say that you could zap or tweak a few parameters in an AI code so it will behave differently, that's like saying if you zap 3 brain cells over here as opposed to 3 or 4 brain cells over there, I will become less sexist or more discriminatory or somehow otherwise change my ethical behavior. We have no idea if that actually could work. Doctors don't know how the brain works like that yet. And we really don't quite know how AI does it either. We're going to be stuck observing and monitoring its outputs, just like you would with any employee. How are we supposed to do that? That is the oversight and business process challenge that we have yet to figure out, but it is clearly coming quite soon. And already regulators are thinking if it's a compliance violation, it's a compliance violation, and the company needs to be responsible for it. We don't really care that it was a person or a tech that did it. It's still a violation. That's basically what these updates from the DOJ are telling us, and we're going to have to respond to it.
And I really like your approach, Matt and Karen. I love your analogies that you've put out there. And the one thing I would add is there are bread and butter compliance issues as well that really I think are going to be changed radically by the fact that if people are putting data into AI, let's take a really mundane example. If a research scientist asks AI to help write a paper, are they putting control technology into AI? And does that then become part of the public domain? And from an export control point of view, having worked at 2 tech companies, I can imagine that's a real risk. And so not only sort of trying to figure out how you debug it or how you uh, deal with black box, but being able to step back and take a big look at what have we actually put into AI that is out there now. And if we put other building blocks into AI, does that mean that at some point we've given away valuable intellectual insights or property or even violated the export control laws?
I will add that the Justice Department is aware that those are some very interesting legal questions, and they have said that they are going to update the guidance they have about vulnerability disclosure programs to try and address some of the copyright and intellectual property concerns that might arise. I also suspect that appellate judges and law professors will have a field day with this for years to come, but it doesn't change the fact that if you have a weakness in AI is going to behave fundamentally differently than a weakness in a spreadsheet program that you release. But I also see that Jonathan Marks is foaming at the mouth to challenge it. So I'll shut up from here.
No, I'm not gonna challenge you. I'm gonna enhance this because you all said such great things. But again, I, I like to break things down and unpack them. This is model validation 101. It's the sources of truth. You have to take, Susan, you're absolutely right. Everything that goes into that black box is a source of truth. It's document. You have to document the process. AI assembles all of this stuff and is formulating some form of logic. You can't take the human out of the loop. But years ago, we were developing transactional screening and cybersecurity screening for all these alerts. I came up with this funnel concept whereby data goes in the top of the funnel, and at certain points and layers in the funnel, you have certain programs that are interrogating that data and giving you better input. At the end of the day, what you're doing is you're creating this artificial intelligence. It was in its rudimentary form, but at the end of the day, when that output comes out, there has to be some human that looks at this at, for certain parameters and says, does this all make sense? That's the other black box. So to me, everything that you all said completely conforms, but it's no different than model validation. It's taking that black box, looking at these sources of truth and figuring out where they go. Companies are going to have to inventory all this stuff and show me what's going in there and how it's going in there. It could be a spreadsheet. It could be something from Oracle or SAP. It all has to go in there. And at the end of the day, you take this giant ball of spaghetti and you start to untangle it in a way that if somebody came in and said you were doing X and Y, you say, hey, that's great. We know it's not perfect, but here's our process. Here's what we went through. These are our sources of truth that we know are valid and we can validate them. So from an internal audit perspective, Matt, internal auditors can certainly help out here by going and saying, okay, fine, show me what's going into this so that we can understand at the end of the day and have some confidence that what's coming out of it at least has the right sources of truth. And that's the process that has to be gone through in order to document all this. I think that's what they're getting at, because it's no different to me than transactional screening and this concept that we call model validation. AI is a model and it needs to be validated. If you're a company that's using it and you're pulling things in from wherever you're pulling from, you better make sure that those sources of truth are valid, complete, and accurate and genuine.